AI in graphic design, here to help or to hurt. This presentation is brought to you by Ali Trees for English 4753. This presentation will go over what artificial intelligence or AI is, what generative AI does, as this presentation will specifically be over generative AI, how AI is affecting the present in graphic design, and how AI will affect the future of graphic design. This information will be throughout the presentation. So let's get started. What is AI and how does it work? Generative AI works by examining vast amounts of information and compiling the common data points into digestible bits of information that mimics human expression. So this can manifest as text, images, audio, video, etc. And probably the most popular platform right now is ChatGPT. There are several big platforms, but the common user is probably going to use ChatGPT. It's a large language model, which is an LLM, and that specifically is one of the biggest aspects of generative AI, and it's extremely advanced. So to become this advanced, AI needs to be trained, and there are two types of training that AI must undergo. The first is supervised, and the second is unsupervised. And so it undergoes supervised training first, which is where it is fed information that is labeled. So it's given a labeled input and output so that it can train itself to recognize the patterns. And then the second is unsupervised. And unsupervised training consists of unlabeled data, and this is what allows the AI to actually develop pattern recognition and trend prediction on its own. So it will learn the patterns of what it has previously been trained on and just keep getting quote unquote smarter, if you will. So every time a user puts in a prompt, it just keeps building off of that. And so the more you use it, the more it works. With AI today, you still have to fact check because the raw data that it is drawing from might not always be correct. This is a map of training AI from a review on large language models, architectures, applications, taxonomies, open issues, and challenges. And this figure talks about the different levels of training AI. So you have the raw data, which is the text from various sources. All of this just like floating. So you feed that to the model by labeling it, so that it can sort of have a basis for how information is to be categorized. And then you feed it the unlabeled data so that it can begin to recognize it on its own, as we just went over. So what does AI have to do with graphic design? AI is becoming a part of almost every job field in varying capacities, and graphic design is no exception to this. In fact, due to AI's image generation capabilities, graphic design is one field that is very largely impacted. And since mainstream generative AI is relatively new and constantly evolving, the exact impact it has and will have in the future of graphic design is difficult to observe and articulate. There is a lot of discussion, however, on the morality of using AI in such a design-heavy and creative field. Is AI-generated content okay to use? What percentage of your content can be generated by AI and still be considered yours? What is the value in an AI-generated design, and who decides that? These are just some of the questions that are floating around in the discourse around AI in this field, and that is what this paper and presentation sort of aimed to tackle. Who decides what percentage of AI is okay? That sort of deal. And so my research methods for this paper were, I had 2 interviews with Tom Futrell and Todd Maggio, who are both graphic designers in the School of Design at Louisiana Tech. And I read a couple of papers as well. So AI and graphic design, here to help us or replace us. The fragility of human rights facing AI. A review on large language models, architectures, applications, taxonomies, open issues, and challenges, which we have seen figure 1 from that paper. Why graphic designers think generative AI needs them as much as they need it, which is a news article. And we have an organization, Coursera.org, which is a sort of online course site. They have an article called "Will AI Replace Graphic Designers?" and the Microsoft Office website, which explains AI and how it works. And so the current trends of AI right now, everything is sort of in a free-for-all. So anyone can create anything at any time. And so this sort of creates a challenge for graphic designers of, is their work still as meaningful? And this is, again, a reiteration of one of the questions that we're trying to answer. For designers, AI ideally is used in the refining process and not the creation process. And in my interviews with Todd Maggio and Tom Futrell, their answer to the question of what makes AI generated work meaningful, or design work meaningful that uses AI generation, what is the value in that? And the answer is sort of, as it stands, using AI in the final result and the creation, the concept of the idea is not really the way that you would want to go as a good designer. You can use it in the refining process to help you create a more clear design. So for instance, with Adobe, you have tools that will help you with the finished product. We discussed how that enables the designer to create something a little more refined, and that is absolutely not frowned upon. It is an advancement, a current advancement that is helping graphic designers tons. But AI today is tearing down barriers that allow non-graphic designers into the field. And so I have an example of this. On the right, you see Louisiana Tech's Blue Bloods Club logo, which me and Tom talked about this in our interview, is very clearly AI generated. And one of the things that we talked about is that currently AI cannot solve the communication gap between the designer and the consumer. So while it can create something that is relatively cohesive, it doesn't have any human touch to it, even though on the surface it might appear so. On their website, they have a list of each element of this logo and what it means for the club. And it's sort of not exactly integrated in this logo. I mean, it's not a bad logo, which, I mean, again, is an example of AI, generative AI, breaking down some of those barriers. But in my discussion with Tom, he mentioned that a human designer could have better integrated these elements into something even more cohesive that would have come across to the consumer in a more digestible way, even though this logo itself isn't a bad one. And so the moral of this is that currently designers in the field are not using AI for the complete process. So using it in the final result to help finalize your design is okay. And using it, to create color palettes, to create text and font considerations, that kind of stuff to help aid in the design process and not the actual generation of the design. Whereas using it in the complete process, as we've mentioned, and also in the conception of the design. So this seems to be a more controversial thing, but another thing that AI is currently used for is to generate ideas. And so another thing that I talked about in my interviews with Tom and Todd is that if you are using AI to generate an idea, is the design yours fundamentally? Because you, as a designer, as a creator, did not come up with it. And I think that is just up to the individual in the field, which brings us to our next topic, which is future developments. So because the development of AI is so rapid, it's hard to say what will happen within the future. Realistically, AI will become more integrated into the design process permanently, and it's here to stay. It is up to the designer and the customer, though, to decide what is an acceptable percentage of AI in the design process as well as the final result. Ideally, the human designer will have more creative freedom, with AI remaining a tool as it is in the current trends, rather than, in some cases, the complete generative process, like we see with the tech logo. Any designer worth their salt is not using generative AI for the complete process, again. And so I hope that that will translate to the future just as it does in the current trends. As a designer, you should have the creative final decision over your design. And so I do anticipate generative AI shrinking in the field. On one hand, it lowers the barrier for smaller creators or those with no design skill who didn't go to college for this. And for these communities, it can be a good thing. For designers, however, not so much, because it shrinks the field again. So it just depends on which way you look at it. For the field, though, it's not, I don't want to say bleak, but it definitely will cause a shift. So the designer is going to have to learn how to use AI in their product, how to integrate it into their design process to create something that the consumer is willing to buy that they can't create with AI themselves. However, I do also anticipate a faction of the design community reverting to a more traditional method of design. So we see this, for example, with the revert to physical media in the age of subscriptions and not actually owning the rights to movies that you purchase. We see a reversion of people canceling their subscriptions and buying DVDs, CDs, making mixtapes, going back to iPods so that they own what they actually pay for. And I sort of see this playing out, at least with a faction of people in the design community. There will be some people who say, I don't want AI in the final product. Let me do that. And it's sort of like that with most creative outlets. You have like a reversion to vinyl. You have a reversion to traditional art versus digital art. This is in all areas, and so I do see a small community of this design field reverting to that. So to summarize, generative AI is here to stay when it comes to the field of graphic design. It is built to work similarly to the human mind and in some cases proves to be a useful tool that saves time. However, due to the unregulated aspect of AI, it is up to designers and consumers to decide what AI should and should not be used for in a self-leveling movement. AI is a powerful tool, but it is currently up to the human designer what the input is and what the final design should be. And ideally, the future will hold the same fate. So if you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to me at the email or the number below, and I really appreciate your time listening to this presentation. Thank you.